It's good to see you here, and thank you so much for coming this evening. Welcome to St John on Bethnal Green. Alan Green, who is the rector here, has apologised that he's not able to be with us this evening, but he's delighted that this event is taking place in his church this evening. I want to say a big thank you at the start of this to Alison for arranging these 3 evenings which are taking place across the diocese over the course of these coming weeks. And I know it's lovely to have met at least a couple from the other side of London who are with us this evening, so thank you for travelling across. And you don't need me to tell you how significant and important these issues are to do with financial inclusion. The Church of England has been working with issues of credit and debt for many years, but I suppose it was Archbishop Justin's intervention a few years ago when he said that we were going to compete Wonga out of business. That got us in the headlines, and I think that comment acted as the catalyst to really get things moving in terms of the life of the Church of England. I'm somebody who have been heavily involved with credit unions going back for many years. I was involved in setting up the first community credit union in Sheffield back in 1992. And so for the last 25 years, credit unions and what they represent and the issues of people being excluded from mainstream credit in this country have been close to my heart. But I must confess that I thought the days when the church was going to make a significant impact had come and gone. And I'm enormously grateful to Archbishop Justin for what he said, and indeed for his own personal commitment to try and enable the Church of England to do something about this on a national level. So you'll be aware that following his intervention, he set up an Archbishop's task force chaired by Sir Hector Sants. I was asked to be a member of that task group, and for 2 years we were looking at a range of potential interventions which the Church of England might be able to make. And I think for everybody involved in these areas, what this has done is to sort of lift the tide in the harbour for a number of different boats. This is something that many different denominations, many different parts of the church are taking extremely seriously. And the Archbishop's intervention has provided a focal point around which we've been able to gather. We pioneered in this part of East London the Church Credit Champions Network, which was a very practical initial response to these issues. And the pilot project came to an end, and I think largely on the back of a successful pilot project for the Church Credit Champions Network and for Lifesavers, the Just Finance Foundation was born. And I sit on the board of that foundation, and Just Finance networks are being rolled out across the country, and this is the launch, I guess, of the London network this evening with Alison as our key worker here in London. So I'm delighted that you've come along this evening. It's a particular joy to welcome Dr Helen Cameron, who's with us this evening as our keynote speaker. I think the Church owes a huge debt of gratitude to the Salvation Army and has done over many years for the lead that they have taken in significant areas of public life. Homelessness, addiction, unemployment, welfare in particular. I think the Salvation Army has really pioneered a lot of the ways forward that the Church is now involved with on a wider scale. They've always had a reputation for getting their hands dirty and doing the hard graft. But Helen is head of public affairs, and that's not just about the hard graft, it's also about policy change and intervention at the strategic level. And bringing those two things together, getting our hands dirty, doing things within our local communities, but also being able to advocate at a policy level is, I think, one of the unique ways in which the churches are able to make a contribution in this area, which is significant and different. Helen's a practical theologian, and prior to her current role, she set up a research centre at an Anglican theological college, but I haven't asked you which one it was.
Cudston.
It was at Cudston, fantastic. And she's written on theological reflection, mission and researching practice, and taught non-profit management. And her latest book is called, this is a plug, have you got copies here? It's called Just Mission, Practical Politics for Local Churches. Helen, we're incredibly grateful that you've come out to join us tonight. Please would you welcome Helen to give her keynote speech.
I hope you noticed the ecumenical and liturgical grace with which the microphone was exchanged. I always think there was thought to be some special movement for the handing over the microphone, shouldn't there? It's lovely to be here this evening, and as you see, I worked with the Church of England, in the Church of England, for the Church of England for 5 years, and so it's always nice to meet with Anglican colleagues and be in your context. I've been asked to inspire you. That's not something I can do, but I'm going to start by turning to Scripture, because I guess what we have in common is that's where we gain our inspiration. So the first slide gives us this passage from Mark's Gospel. Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins worth only a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on." So I've called my talk this evening, "Where should the widow place her mite?" In the financial environment in which we find ourselves today, what can people in poverty trust? Where can they place their money? Widows appear throughout the Bible as examples of people whose lives were socially and economically precarious. They were dependent on their extended family. Sometimes they were offered in marriage to their brother-in-law and expected to produce children with him on their husband's behalf. And sometimes their home, their assets, even the care of their children was taken from them. And so to be a widow was truly a terrible thing in biblical times. And there are parts of the world today where being a widow is truly a terrible thing and your life becomes one of precariousness. So I like to throw out a few challenges. So my first challenge this evening is to take your favourite gospel and to go through it. And every time you find the word widow, read the word financially excluded and then see what those passages mean to you when you swap those words around, because that's who the widows stand for in the Gospels, the financially precarious, the financially excluded. But like so many people who are overlooked, Jesus notices the widow. She's not invisible to him. And although her mite, her 2 small coins, were a fraction of a day's wage, it was all that she had to live on. So if we are to engage with people living in poverty, we too must notice. We must notice the lack of financial services available to them, but more importantly, we must notice their generosity. And we must notice the difficult decisions they have to make every day on what to do with the little that they have. We can do nothing until we've done that noticing. That really has to be the starting point for what we do. But then another, perhaps more uncomfortable thing we have to notice is that within us, which wants to pass judgments on the decisions that people in poverty make about their resources. Certainly in the Salvation Army, we frequently hear people condemning the people we serve for having mobile phones. And yet, if you're involved in anything to do with the benefit system, you know that the government is increasingly expecting people to claim and manage their benefits using a mobile phone. So why wouldn't you have one? So there's something about this noticing which then starts us asking some questions of us. And we do make judgments, and becoming aware of those judgments is an important part of the Christian response to people who are financially excluded. I want to make 5 points, which hopefully will pop up in front of you. They're fairly straightforward ones, I hope. What does low income mean in London? We need to look at the pounds, shillings and pence. What does it cost to live in London? And I know you're all going to say, yeah, an awful lot. It's an incredibly expensive place to be. And then where do people on low income go for credit? If the money runs out, where can you go to get credit? And then 2, again, particular questions addressed to us as churches. What on earth can the church do? And then a question that particularly interests me is, what in heaven's name can the church do? What can we say as representative Christians? What can our witness be on this topic? So let's move quickly through some slides which show, first of all, what low income means in London. I take no credit for these slides. As a middle-aged lady, I employ people younger and smarter than me to produce PowerPoints. And so it's one of my interns, Lucy, who has produced the slides for this, so I want to give her credit for doing that. So what does low pay look like? Well, here are hourly rates. We know that the government's introduced a national living wage, which is replacing the minimum wage, which is set at £7.50. And we know also there's a Living Wage Foundation who says that the London living wage should be £9.75. We know there's been a lot of fuss about 0 hours contracts where you have to commit to an employer, but you don't know how many hours you're going to be paid for. And some employers are making a big fuss about getting rid of those contracts, but some of them are replacing them with what are called 4-hour contracts, where you're just guaranteed 4 hours a week of work, and then you have to ask for the rest. So is that any better than a 0 hours contract? You certainly can't get a mortgage or a loan or any credit on the basis of 4 hours a week. So there's a lot of difficulties in the labour market. Then obviously there are people who are claiming benefits, and the rates of benefits are these. It's £73.10. And if you're disabled, you now have to be a certain kind of disabled person to get the rate for people who have extra cost due to disability, which is £109.65. Pensioners have a guaranteed level of income. If they don't have an occupational pension, then the state guarantees them £159.35, or for a couple, £243.25. So that's the pounds, shillings and pence that we're talking about. That's what poverty looks like. And again, in the Salvation Army's employment services, we're increasingly being approached by people who have stopped claiming benefits because they found it too stressful. They couldn't meet the conditionality that was expected of them, and are therefore living on fresh air and are relying upon the generosity of friends and family. And so there are people who are even further excluded because they don't feel able to engage with the benefits system. So, living in London, well, the benefit rates I've shown you are what you get for your living expenses, but you can then claim housing benefit to cover your housing costs, but only up to a certain limit. So the housing benefit available for a one-bedroom flat varies significantly between London boroughs, and this is what it looks like. So huge differences between outer and inner London, but those rates are only designed to pay for the 30% cheapest properties. And so many people find themselves moving into a property, claiming housing benefit. The landlord puts the rent up, and then they have to find from their living costs the extra that the landlord is asking for them. So there are lots of people who are living in properties where the housing benefit isn't covering the cost of their rent. And then if you think about things like utilities, these costs are all present in people's lives. The rich and poor alike need to turn on the lights and have to heat their homes, and those things are difficult to obtain cheaply. And sadly, some of the cheapest ways in which you can obtain utilities and things like telephones are if you can go online, if you can pay in advance, and if you can set up a direct debit. So ironically, we live in a society where the cheaper rates are go to the people who are more financially secure, and that doesn't seem quite right, does it? That people in poverty are somehow punished for their poverty by having to pay more for these essentials. So, if the money runs out, well, where can you go for credit? I think one of the common misconceptions is that people living on the very lowest incomes and people living on benefits somehow do something irresponsible that takes them to the door of some kind of credit provider. And I think that's to completely fail to understand that stuff happens, and stuff usually costs money. And it can be things over which you have no no control. I have a friend in Oxford who was part of the pilot scheme where they started paying people's housing benefit to them rather than to their landlord. There's a pilot that lasted for 6 months. She was on the pilot for 6 months and she was thrilled that she'd managed to hand over her rent. In month 7, her mother in Glasgow died. She was living in Oxford. And she said to me, if I'd had that money in month 7, I would have gone and bought a train ticket and I would have gone to my mum's funeral. As it was, that choice wasn't open to her because the rent went back to being directly paid. But which amongst us could say that given our rent money and given a funeral in Glasgow of a loved one, we wouldn't have done that? And then the next thing is, well, how do I cover the debt? How do I cover the rent that I haven't paid? So for most of us, there's some kind of buffer which enables us to cope with these things that happen in life. It can be a birthday, it can be an invitation to a wedding, it can be a need to travel, it can be having to make regular hospital visits, paying for hospital parking, buses to hospitals. These are things that just are part of normal life, but when there's no buffer, then these are the things which put you into the hands of people offering credit. And we know that there are businesses who understand very well that because people in poverty have no choice but to spend every last bean, therefore they are people who will come forward seeking credit, and there are businesses whose business model is built upon that. And I've listed some of the less glorious members of that fraternity on that slide there. And this is going to be my second challenge I'm going to throw out to you. First one was about rereading a gospel, but this is the second challenge. I'm sure in a church near you there is a food bank, and I'm sure at that food bank people are directed to other sources of support. But what I want to know is who is standing outside your local Bright House with a leaflet on free debt advice. That's what I want to know. So that's what I call covering people's backs, is the point at which they succumb to the temptation of debt. Who is there? So for me, if there are volunteers in parishes who feel this is all too much for me, there's nothing I can do. Sometimes people plead being old for saying there's nothing they can do, which is complete rubbish because, as we know, the church is run by people of a senior dispensation. But you could stand outside your local bricks and mortar dispenser of this extortionate credit and give people who come in and out a leaflet explaining where their local debt advice centre is, so that they know that there is an alternative and somebody's got their back, somebody's looking out for them. And that's a very simple thing to do. I'd love to see Church of England with its, what am I called it, cash flow, positivity, that's a good way of describing what the Church of England has, buy some Google ads. So if you Googled any of these companies, what I would like to see come up alongside them is an advert saying, click here for free debt advice. So that as you were looking at the possibility of credit, so the possibility of help in managing your finances popped up on Google at the same point. I think that would be really fantastic. And I don't know how these things work, but certainly the people who know how Google Ads work can make themselves pop up alongside pretty well anything. And I think that would be a fantastic witness, so that at the point at which the person is standing there with their might, going, this money is not going to stretch, there's some constructive help at hand. So that's another challenge that I wanted to throw out there. Okay, let's get down to brass tacks and start to look at some of the practical things that can be done. There are clearly people here this evening who are going to give you the lowdown on some of these practical things. So I just want to sort of create a framework really for thinking about this. And this is what we... this is the sort of sequence of things that we suggest to our frontline in the Salvation Army. Helping people maximise their income, straightforward. Are they getting the benefits they need? Are they getting the right benefits? Helping people think about what income they could be receiving and making sure that they're getting access to that income. Then obviously budgeting is a huge issue, helping people find out which are the cheapest sources of the utilities, helping people finding a cheaper childcare provider, helping people understand what options are open to them. Yes, you could live with second-hand furniture that didn't put you into debt That is possible. There are people who can do that. Don't worry, you don't have to have the latest stuff. That doesn't diminish you as a human being. All that kind of stuff can be incredibly helpful. Now, debt advice is a regulated activity, so you can't suddenly pop up one morning and decide you're going to do it. But what you can do is point people in the direction of debt advice and help them find credible people who will work through their debt issues with them. And then you can start to get people thinking about alternative forms of credit provision. So absolutely, credit unions, getting people engaged with those is really important. And there are some alternative providers of credit here this evening that I really suggest that you talk to. And then we've talked about digital inclusion. So again, so much of, this world's help is now online, and so supporting people in going online is amazingly important. I don't know what it's like near you, but the libraries near me are now rationing people for a half-hour slot online in the library. You can't make a universal credit claim in half an hour. Sorry, nobody's managed to do that. So again, if you can offer people free online facilities and support in using them, that again is a huge help. Support with appointments. Again, so many people are in a really tough place when these things happen, and just the moral support of accompanying somebody to an appointment, or texting them to remind them to go to the appointment, or phoning them up afterwards and saying how did it go, so that they can offload the emotions of keeping an appointment. Those are very simple things, but my goodness, they're incredibly important in helping people engage with the people that are there to support them. And then there's another huge thing about reducing stigma, and I'll mention this again at the end, but it's good to plot the price of the cups of coffee within walking distance of the front door of your parish church, and to think, okay, if I was on £73.10 a week, could I afford any of those cups of coffee? And if the answer is no, put the kettle on. It is kind of that simple, because we now live in a society where engaging with people outside the home is the key way in which people engage with each other. Come on round to mine and we'll put the kettle on doesn't seem to be where it's at anymore. I don't know why that's changed, but it has changed. There's a need to go somewhere to meet people over a cup of coffee. So there are some very simple things that the church can do to create activities which mimic society, but which don't cost the arm and a leg that society is. So church cafes, supporting charity shops, all these kind of places, just really, really important. Okay, how am I doing for time? I'm rabbiting on a bit. I'm coming to a close. This is point 5. Oh, that's a relief. Okay, we're nearly there. So now we come to the bit that I do for a living, which is political lobbying. Clearly, helping individuals is really important, and that response of compassion is a huge part of what it means to be a Christian. But there is also the call for justice. And so, again, something I say very often is, if you are fishing somebody out of the stream at the same point every week, send somebody upstream to find out who's pushing them in. Okay? That upstream response is incredibly important. And as the Bishop said earlier, in the church, we really are in a really powerful place, because we've got the compassionate hands-on people, and we've also got the people who will go up the line and think about justice. And some of these things will only change when systems change. And so whilst it's a compassionate response to the individual is really important, systems change is also really important. And I think God has equipped the church with people, what I call heart and hand Christians, who want to get in there to build the relationships, to do the helping. And then there are some head Christians who want to do the thinking and the challenging. So there's a role for people of different spiritualities and different temperaments within the life of the church. And there really is a role for people who have those head ways of engaging to sort out the hassles that people in poverty face. Great believer in complaining. If you know how to go online and work out a complaint system, then do that, and then support somebody in complaining. That's something which people are entitled to do, and if there are private companies messing them around, and if there are public agencies messing them around, then encourage people to complain. It sometimes brings people up short and improves their response. As you know, politicians of all sizes and shapes are supposed to do casework. They're supposed to take up issues on behalf of people. So I have a sort of rule of thumb, really. If it's a local authority that's upsetting somebody, take it up with a local councillor. If it's transport, that's the London Assembly, so get onto your Assembly member. If it's a central government agency, then get onto your MP. But if it's two people simultaneously making somebody's life a misery, go straight to the MP. Because where there are two organisations who are getting it wrong for somebody, then somebody needs to bang some heads together, and the MP's caseworker is best placed to do that. I've employed people who've gone on to be MP's caseworkers. I can assure you they're delightful people, and they love it when somebody comes to them supported by somebody who's already listened to them. Because the one thing they're short of is time. And so if you can do some unconditional listening and help people work out what the issue really is that they really need sorting out, then that puts them in a fantastic place to go and take up their case with a politician. And again, I'm just going to throw this out as a challenge. The church is one of the few institutions left in society that can listen to people in their own terms. And that sometimes is the biggest gift we give to anybody, is just to say, just tell it me how you see it. I'm not here because you fit into category A. I'm not here to put you into problem B. Just you tell me it as you're seeing it, and then we'll take it from there. And that kind of unconditional, open-hearted listening is one of the biggest gifts which the church brings to society. And people who are struggling financially are usually having to explain themselves time after time after time. Oh, today I'm a housing problem. Right, I need to explain myself as a housing problem. Oh, today I'm a parent of a child who's not able to concentrate at school because they're not eating. That's how I need to explain myself. This constant reinvention and retelling of your story is a huge burden on the lives of people in poverty. And what we can do in the church is just listen to people on their own terms. So complaining is really important. And if you know your councillor, and if you know your MP, and if you know your London Assembly member, then it's a lot easier to refer people to them. And then you have a secret weapon. Well, you don't at the moment. There's not a Bishop of London at the moment, is there? We're still in a... Okay. But you do have a secret weapon. So I'd love to have a bishop. Sorry, I shouldn't hit my chest. I haven't got a bishop, right? You've got a bishop. You've got a bishop in the House of Lords, right? So if somebody is really getting something badly wrong on a repeated basis and you start to spot a new problem emerging, the Bishop of London can speak to any government minister as of right. I mean, you're just so lucky in the Justice Department, you guys, because you've got somebody whose job it is to get in there. Obviously, they're not going to raise individual problems, but if you spot something that's happening time after time after time, or an area of legislation or policy that's badly going wrong, then make representations. That's how democracy is supposed to work. And you have this amazing privilege in the Church of England of having your own representatives in the legislature. So yeah, and if you've got a few bishops that you don't want in the Church of England, hand them over. I'd love to have my own personal Salvation Army bishop on speed dial who I could get lobbying for me. But no, I mean, I'm being frivolous. But what I'm saying is that don't underestimate the access you have. As the established church, you're in a very privileged position, and you have a very credible voice that goes from the grassroots of a parish right through to the highest levels of government, and you can intervene at the level which is appropriate. And certainly, as Archbishop Justin has taken up this issue, it's entirely appropriate for bishops to continue to follow up this issue and to keep it prominent within Parliament. So I feel so strongly about all this. What in heaven can we do? Where are we up to? Tower Hamlets. We've moved on to that. Hang on. No, that's fine. No. This is another challenge I'm afraid I'm throwing out. So yes, if you go on to those ones. So, universal credit. Getting some nods of recognition. The benefit system is changing, and all the benefits which working age people can claim are being merged into a single benefit called universal credit. And the setting up of this benefit is proving problematic, to put it mildly. But as the benefit is, at the moment, only single people have to apply for this benefit, but it's now gradually being rolled out to families. And this is where some of the really big problems are starting to happen. But as families are being asked to apply for universal credit, the local authority is supposed to be setting up a service to support them in applying. Okay? Some local authorities are keeping very quiet about this, some are being very upfront about it. Croydon is the one that's done the most work in this area. So again, one of the things that you could do is, as universal credit for families hits your local job centre, you could be saying to the local authority, okay, where's the additional support for people who are applying for this benefit, and just make sure that they've done something about it. And there's a second slide here with some of the other boroughs. So that's something that we're trying to do in the Salvation Army. We're trying to get our frontline churches to make representations as universal credit is rolled out, to make sure that the support that is promised is put in place. Okay, so that was a little extra thing. On to the next slide. So I've been allowed to plug my book. I am so passionate about this that I have written a book explaining to local churches how to lobby, and it's called Just Mission, Practical Politics for Local Churches. This is not... I always think, if you can cope with the Deanery Synod, you can lobby your MP. I mean, for heaven's sake, I mean, it's just a case of knowing how systems work, who to talk to, when to turn up. You know, this is something which your average Christian is not beyond you. So I have written that book, which says how to get a small group of Christians together to lobby on issues in your local community. I've bought 6 copies and they're at a tenner, so I'm passing on my author discount to anybody who'd like to have one this evening. So that's the end of the adverts. But it is something where, you see, how am I doing? Am I allowed to, am I okay? Sure. After the First World War, the church had built up a really awful reputation for handouts. That was what people associated the church with, was handouts. And part of the impetus that went into what the Liberal government did, and then the setting up of the welfare state after the Second World War, was a reaction against what charities and churches did, and saying these people, all they care about is being seen to be compassionate. And the justice thing just completely went by the board, and I just have a slight anxiety that the church is heading in that direction again, that we've been so heartfelt about the financial crisis and all the results of it, that we've just put all our energy into the compassion end and we've slightly lost sight to the justice end. And I think in terms of how the nation understands the church, the justice end is so important. Right, this is my last slide. I spoke to you about this passage at the beginning, and some commentators have said, no, to understand the story of the widow's mite, you need to look at the verses that come before it. So Jesus said, watch out for the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplace. Note the marketplace. And have the most important seats in the synagogue and the places of honour at banquets. But they devour widows' houses, and for show make lengthy prayers. These are the men who will be punished most severely. What did Jesus mean talking about widows' houses in that context? Is he saying that powerful men would engage in this exploitation of the financially excluded and enable these women, these widows, to be robbed of their livelihoods, their possessions, their homes, their children? Is he really saying that? Is he in fact talking not about this woman's poverty, but about the way in which the religious leaders treated women in poverty? I don't know. This is what some commentators have said. So I think the question we're left with is this widow paying her temple tax in order to retain her dignity, her sense of being a righteous person who is in good reputation in the eyes of the law? And would we say, well, surely you'd be better off spending your money on your living costs? But is that for us to say that people in poverty have no need for dignity or no need to be seen as a full member of society? Is that what we're saying to them when we say, well, you need to save your money and spend it on the essentials? Don't give it to that church. They're okay. Is that what we're saying? And so I think my final challenge is to say, in the church, is there a danger that we turn a blind eye to the way in which poor people are treated? And is there some danger that our religious system has lost sight of what it means to be poor?